Bliss and Grit is an entirely listener-supported show. Supporting us is also designed to support you through keeping the episodes rolling, but also through rewards for your donation, like a getting started guide, a private forum, and downloadable meditations. To become a supporting member, you can visit patreon.com/bliss and grit. Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're having conversations about the awakening spiritual path and what does that even mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, the beauty and the crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? Thank you for being here as a listener. We hugely appreciate it. If you want to stay up to date on all things Bliss and Grit and get a weekly digest of the resources that we are currently loving, you can go to blissandgrit.com to subscribe. And if you're wanting more in-depth support as you navigate your own path and internal process, we both see clients privately. So feel free to go to the website for more information on that as well. The last thing before we head into the conversation, we do sometimes curse. So if you are in non-swearing company, you may want to wear headphones. Okay, here we go.
Hello, Brooke.
Hey, Vanessa.
Well, this will be an interesting conversation, I think, today. We'll see where it goes, just for you listening. We were going to have a conversation about something that's been popping up on our radar, and we thought we'd have it in process with you. So here's the backstory. Over the last couple of weeks, we heard about, yet again, another teacher where people are complaining about their behavior, filing complaints about their behavior. And it's someone we're in a loose relationship with. And so, y'all, I mean, we've already recorded episodes about this, about teachers behaving badly, and we've spoken about this in depth, but it got us thinking today about the mythologies of awakening. Like, what is it that we're bringing into relationship with our spiritual teachers that may blind us to some of their unhealthy behaviors or thought processes, and really just keep us in situations that aren't humming along for our highest good. And so that's, I think, what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the mythologies around awakening. And within this conversation, the difference between what some people or some teachers would call growing up and waking up, or we can say spiritual awakening versus spiritual maturity. So how's that for a beginning, Brooke? You think we can kind of kick in right there?
I think we will. We'll see where we go.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, first, I just like that we're taking this from the mythology of awakening place, because as you said, we've talked about misconduct, not that we couldn't have, I think, many nuanced discussions about that, because it brings up lots of different feelings and concerns. But for sure, one of the ways that we get in trouble when we're on a path is that we have ideas. That's what so I use certain words interchangeably. Vanessa and I both do. So ego is one of those words that we all are hip to, and for good and for ill. So it's become interpreted as a different thing. So synonyms for what I mean by ego would be, Sue Motor uses protective personality, which I like very much. I heard another teacher, I can't remember her name, call it ideas of self, or the idea of self, which I liked very much. And I'm just saying those not so that we can perfectly pin down what it is we're pointing out, but just so that we can kind of loosen up this idea of the ego. So ego, protective personality, idea of self, it can only have ideas and projections about what a thing is. It can't actually experience the truth of the experiencer or what's actually happening in the present moment. So we could say that it is confused and that it got confused along a more survival pathway of the brain that wants to keep us safe. So it got confused with really super good intentions. It's not the evil demon that lives inside of us, but it's confused. And so one of the ways this confusion plays out when we're on a path is that we have ideas about what awakening is, what awakened means. Maybe we even bring in the E word, what enlightenment means, and where we're headed. The other thing, separate self, another synonym for ego. The other thing separate self can do is make things in time, right? I'll cross the finish line and then I'll be enlightened, and enlightenment will look like this. So let's just list some of the things, right? Like some of the ideas that we see commonly that people have, and certainly I speak for myself that I have had, at different points. So, one of the places that we get in the most trouble with teachers is I had this idea that it meant that they were perfectly healed and whole. That if there was, and that they were totally cleaned out, that it happened in this all or nothing way. So, Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree and blammo, light switch, right?
And then he sounded like a pretty amazing dude.
Pretty great dude.
Like great guy.
Yeah. The story of Jesus is more nuanced. We actually get to see him struggle with his humanity, which is interesting. But it's still obviously
still a pretty great guy.
Still a great guy. And certainly the lineage of Christianity took it in this, the perfect one, the Son of God, which we are not, right? He's the one that's the Son of God, but not us. So let's, worship and adore. So the ideas are they're the perfect being, and that it happens all at once in a very complete way. So they're incapable of delusion, incapable of harm, incapable of confusion, because all of those things, incapable of psychological immaturity, because all those things go with the ego, right? So when the light switch flips, which in my experience, I can really think of people, I only can think of Byron Katie, and I don't know that to be true. I've never studied with Byron Katie or sat with her. Maybe if I had dinner with her, I'd be like, oh, like she's got her foibles and hangups. Probably, but hers is the only story where I didn't hear a narrative of the after I woke up and then, right? Like there was this strong metabolic process that went on where you're gradually shifting. And that it wasn't
she did say she did the work a lot in the beginning.
So she did have to engage with her
part of it.
Thought forms. Yeah, you're right. And she also talked about some health stuff. Like there were certain foods she would go to eat and her body would immediately reject the food. So that's also a part of a process, right? Of like, oh, things are different. Oh, I can't sort of be off the mark here. So that's one idea, is that they are the embodiment of perfection in a way that makes them not human. They might be in human bodies, but their souls are so perfect and so shiny and bright that they don't live like us humans, right? So some of the ideas that go along with that are they don't experience, right? People talk about the end of suffering. And so people will assume that that means they don't experience pain. They don't experience the emotions we would think of as heavier or more negative: sadness, grief, anger, longing. So there's a lot of those ideas. There'll be the one who is sort of floating above the humanness. We're the ones here wrestling with our stuff, but they're up there, floating above it. Certainly we hear a lot. You and I don't hang in these circles that much, but there's the story of superpowers, cities, right? So people who can heal the sick or become psychic, or certainly we have teachers who I would consider have some of these qualities, but we don't wind up hanging out with people who kind of glorify the super, super special superpower deity type, but that's out there too. What are some other ideas about?
So I would say it's not necessarily a mythology that happens, but we can have an idea that will happen for us, right?
And that's the goal.
The goal
is like
that's the goal.
I'll be superhuman because I'll have special powers and abilities. And that, of course, is like an ego point of view, right? Like, I'm going to get even more special. Like, I'm going to become, finally, I'll be officially good and worthy because superpowers is like one of the fill in the blanks that goes there.
Yeah, I totally wanted superpowers. Well, I think that probably you mentioned the one that is the thing that we want to talk about, really, which is in relationship to what I introduced as we came into this call, which is that we have an idea that in people who are awakened have all the answers.
Yeah. And that
they have
cleaned
answers.
Out.
Yeah. And that they have answers that we don't have, that we can't have, that they're somehow different than us, that they're somehow above us. And we can see that in a relative reality, it's relatable why we would say that, right? I mean, if they have nothing different than us, why even listen to them, right? Like, why even pay them any mind? We can experience when we sit with someone who's had a profound shift of identity, which is what we can call awakening. It's a profound shift of identity away from the ego self to we'll call it original self or soul, right? So when you sit with someone who has had a profound shift, I mean, you feel it. Mm-hmm. Something's different, right? You know this, Brooke, of course. Like, something's different in the way their being is organized. Something comes off of them that is palpable. It's almost like different frequencies. And you can pick up on those frequencies with your own radio antenna of your being. And so there's something there, and they have insight. They have real insight. But I guess one thing that's coming into my mind is like, okay, let me see if I can articulate something that surprised me. Okay, so they have insight. That's clear. Mm-hmm. But if we take 10 different awakening teachers, depending on who they are, how vast their awakening is, what their conditioning was, what their experiences in life were, they may not get it all.
Yeah.
Right now, I thought if you had an awakening, blammo, you get it all. And really what you get is that identity shift. Mm-hmm. You know you're more than you thought. You know you're not just this body. You're not just this ego mind. And you're in a deep sense of oneness from that space. But I thought that meant that if we put 10 awakened teachers, they would describe the path to awakening the same. The processes they would recommend would be the same. The exercises would be the same. Every awakening teacher would understand every person. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's a fundamental truth that they all will share, and that they can all access and resonate within us. But then there's different flavors of the rainbow. If a teacher has not even been through anything like what we've been through, would they get it? And will their process be the thing that will guide us into our experience? So that was already one thing. Like, when I found a teacher I resonated with, then I would hear them and think, well, if this makes sense to me, if this rings true, this teaching, this insight they're sharing, then I guess everything they're saying is true because mm-hmm. they're awakened. So then when a teacher would say something to me, or someone we're talking with on the show or whatever, that didn't resonate, like I was like, this is not hitting a sweet note on me. This is not ringing true. I would forego what I thought, because obviously the awakened person knows more, right? Now, this is a beautiful move of humility, or one could say reverence or deference, that is so built into the old paradigm of the guru model, right? Of the spiritual teacher model. And it's wonderful to sometimes put a question mark next to your firmly held belief, because someone who is living from the space of presence will see things you won't see. But how quickly do we let go of ourselves? Is it an inquiry, or do I just wholesale, well, this person's awake, therefore they know the truth and they see everything, therefore I must be wrong, and forego my own inquiry and process of exploration?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking about, I have friends, of course, who've pointed out things to me about myself that at the time I couldn't see in myself. So for example, I spent a long stretch of my life in if we feel like being trauma nerds, which often we do, might call like a habitual flight, always busy, workaholic, always some big plan, always like really strong future thinking that always had me kind of whipped up into a lot of activity and busyness, right? So for friends, especially friends who aren't wired that way, like you and my other dear friend, Jen, right? Like they can see that. And maybe we can all imagine these friend moments, right? Where a friend is like, hey, you ever notice that you're always making yourself crazy with some big project? Or do you ever notice that you're crazy, crazy busy all the time and it's sort of burning you out? These are just examples of something a loving friend might say because we notice things in another person. And then I would take that in, right? And because I feel safe with my friends, like, right? It plants a seed in my own conscious awareness of like, maybe this is excessive. Like these are people I love and trust. And maybe I don't need to feel this way inside all the time where it's this constant churning, burning kind of activity. And then something shifts in me. Then if that gets applied to a spiritual teacher, the difference is the pedestal. A spiritual teacher is there to point out our habits of the separate self, our ideas about ourselves, our protective personality, so that we can have contact with our true self, with our actual being. So they might say something like, in whatever language they would use, like, hey, you ever notice how you're always racing towards the future, always chronically busy? And the tricky bit is when we take that in with this idea that they are on a pedestal, that they are existing literally outside of the realm of humanity. And in this example, they would be pointing out something quite ordinary and useful. Mm-hmm. What happens when something comes along that if I plant the seed in my own being, my own awareness feels around and goes, no, that's not true. If they're on a pedestal and I have devotion to them, and obviously the reason why we find ourselves on spiritual paths is because we're usually suffering, right? Like we're looking to transmute something. We're looking to have a different experience of our lives because it doesn't feel great. We're looking for something to shift. It would be much easier to tip things in the balance of just swallowing the self. That would say what my soul would say is like, no, that would be a very healthy movement if they had something, just to come up with a sort of cartoonish example of old school guru, like they would decide who's going to marry each other, right? In the lineage.
We know someone that happened.
We do know somebody who
will get married and have a baby.
Yeah, and it's like it doesn't matter that you're not feeling it and that you don't want to be married to this person. I say you two married, baby, and how easily I'm sure in a situation like that, because marriage and parenting is so intimate, if it doesn't actually feel like a fit, can you imagine the size of the feeling of no inside and how you would have to turn away from that because the pedestal, like, well, they said that this is the way it's going to go. So they know better than I do. They're seeing things from a different point of view.
Yeah. And it depends on, what belief systems we've developed in our life, what life lessons we're here for, what our personal experiences. So sometimes I remember having someone say to me that I should do something logistical with my life. Like, you should do this, you should sell your house. And there was that energy of, and if you don't, you're a dum-dum.
Right,
you know,
exactly.
like, I see, you don't. And it was such an extreme affront to my own agency that I was like, no, I'll do whatever I want. Like, it didn't even occur to me that this person should have purview over my major life decisions. Someone else, that may not be the case, right? Depending on how we are perceiving the awakened person. But I have fallen to this in more subtle ways where there's just something I see or feel about reality that I sense to be true, or maybe even a pattern running in an awakened teacher where you're like, I feel like you're lost in the void of I'm nobody doing nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's plenty of that around.
Right. And that's kind of an awakening conditioning. I'm nobody doing nothing. Yes. And you're in a body and you're doing something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
right. Both are true at the same time.
Both are true, right? But your attachment to one being the way to describe it is interesting. So I can fall, I have not fallen, like just I have, because of my reverence for awakened teachers, thrown my own inner voice, like intuition, to the side when it's smaller cases. Like, I don't know, maybe they're just giving you a teaching and you sense something different about life, right? Like, for example, maybe they're a classical non-dualist and they're just don't pay attention to your thoughts. Okay. That doesn't seem like enough for me.
Yeah, it doesn't. If I check in, it doesn't work.
Check in with experience. That's not resonant. But if I had them on a pedestal, I would say, okay, just don't pay attention to my thoughts. And then I'd go about the business of trying not to, against my own inner motion, right? And what we're looking for is to find truth within. I mean, that's the mystic within me. We know God through direct experience within us. So it's beautiful that we get these markers outside of teachers or experts or friends. They're wonderful. That makes life rich and that gives us so much insight. But ultimately, finally, the journey is within. And we need to recognize we are, right? Stop seeking, because then we'll always be the seeker, and become the finder and recognize we are it. And yes, we will probably mistake fear for intuition at some point.
Yeah.
And yes, we're going to blindside ourselves. And yes, these funny things are going to happen, because that's what it means to be a soul in a body on a 3-dimensional reality we call Earth. Right? These funny little things are going to happen because that's the human journey that we're meant to be on. But I think that it's so easy to hear someone else, especially depending on your wiring, right? How externally oriented are you to an authority figure having dominion over you? Or how much were you wounded and dying for a good mommy or a good daddy or God, something pure to hold on to? Right? How much were you doing that so that you let go of your inner wisdom? So that whole idea that any one awakened teacher sees and knows everything about this human journey.
Right.
They may see and know everything about oneness. Oneness is oneness. There's not a lot to know. Once you know it, you know it. We're all one. Okay. But the human journey is where it gets real interesting.
Yeah. And that's what we're here to do, is to have this really interesting experience of identifying as one point of consciousness that has a name and a story and lived experiences. For me, I remember, so my first actual awakening experience, and just like everyone else, it was not what I thought it would be. It was not what I thought I was going for on the spiritual journey. It was not what I expected to get. So it was like everyone's realization experience, a real big surprise. So I'm telling this because it kind of lands in a like, it doesn't mean, right, that like, and now I know that the truth of all things and I see from this pedestal point of view, but sometimes it's helpful to hear people who've had actual awakenings and are interested in being an embodied human, and just like, can we talk about how having big realizations, and I've had a few, doesn't automatically translate into being superior in any way at all.
Or
in fact,
fully, completely integrated being.
Right. Like, oh, good. And now I don't have any, neuroses, quirks, hang-ups, hurt feelings. Yeah, that's not fucking true at all. For me, my first realization was of, what spiritual teachings would call no self. Like, I saw that I had never done anything. Basically, I saw God moving through me, and that I wasn't an I, and that there was just actually this life force moving through my body. And the feeling was like euphoric, because instead of it feeling like, oh, I'm a sock puppet for God, which I did get in that cul-de-sac after, but in the moment it was pure euphoria, because it was a realization that I am God, and so is everything. Not just special Brooke is godlike, like, oh my God, literally every single thing here is God. And so I have all of the agency of God, was the phrase that came through. I have all of the agency of God. I have never done anything in my whole life, was like the most glorious. So I spent some time in my awakening honeymoon period, which was awesome and so fun. And then, like, most people, it has this kind of aperture open, aperture closed, without going through the whole story. Shortly after that, I remember watching a video of Muji. Of course, like, I'm bringing up Muji. Speaking of teachers who have recently been outed for misconduct. But anyway, this is before I knew any of that. I was just watching a video of a woman asking him a question in the audience at a satsang. And at the end, she asks, like, can I come up? He's sitting on the dais, right? Like, can I come up? And she is holding on to him and looking at him with the most, like, naked adoration / desperation that I have ever seen in my life. And something in me found it so repugnant, not her, but that he was allowing her to do it. Because I was like, if he knows what I know, and I think he does, he knows that they are no different. And that he has no business taking advantage of her thinking that there is a difference. Sure, she can't directly see that literally everything here is God. I am also God. Okay, we can't just like magic wand that experience into her. But what you could do as the teacher, and I remember having such a strong visceral reaction, is just to simply redirect. He let her adore him. And I think we now know what some of Muji's hangups were. And he could have redirected as a teaching, right? I see this adoration that you are putting on me, but you are God. You are no different from me. I do not belong up on this stage. I just happen to be playing the teacher role right now. There's no difference between us. And it's so important to realize that these awakenings are fascinating. In fact, I love when Neelam was talking with us in our conversation with her, and she said spiritual realizations or spiritual awakenings are just like candy. And I was like, yeah, like the best candy, but they're just candy. Then you're still this one, you're still this one, and you have to metabolize all of the things. And we have to remember that about teachers too. Do I have a sustained, consistent experience of the awakened state? Nope. Will I maybe someday? I don't know. I don't particularly care one way or the other. That'll happen or it won't. Do I think some teachers do? Yes. I have sat with teachers who I believe consistently exist, where they really understand in the fabric of their being what I realized for a moment. I don't live from there in the whole fabric of my being all of the time. But I also know that they're never not people. And that it doesn't automatically, it never makes you better than or other than any human being. And it certainly doesn't automatically clear out all of the stuff that comes with
all of
this
psychological life and intergenerational conditioning that arrived with that person. I mean, that's what gets really interesting. So people speak about things like waking up and growing up. Locke Kelly in our interview spoke about stuff like this. If he didn't do it in the interview, he certainly did it in his first book, where he was making reference to just because you've had a realization of the divine, it doesn't mean you've done the psychological healing to be a person who's healthy in relationship. So I just want to back up for a second. When people use the word awakening, especially today, right? So we used to use the word, back when I was growing up, enlightenment. And enlightenment meant one thing. You were like the Buddha. Because I was studying Eastern philosophy.
Buddha,
yeah, we can use a lot of different images, but it was, that's it, donezo. Like, without a shadow of a doubt that there's more to this reality than what we see and experience in the 3D, that you are not just the body, but you are in a body, and that and your identity is not placed on your ego structure anymore. Like, donezo. Okay. You're seeing through the veil completely. So that was our model. And we called it enlightenment. But these days, as it seems, consciousness is expanding and evolving at such a rapid pace that many people are breaking through the veil and they're having these realizations. Holy wow. There's more than I thought. I'm more than I thought. Wow. There's a universe. Wow. We can be creators. Wow. We're one. And they're popping through these veils. So the conversation has become quite popularized to talk about awakening, right? Well, just like anything, that means people are going to have different perspectives on what awakening means. Okay. So that's first. So then when we're listening to a teacher or a guide or a therapist, and they said, well, when I had my awakening, which is a very common thing, what do they mean? What do they mean? Do they mean they're in a sustained state of samadhi where they're at oneness with everybody? Do they mean they had a brilliant realization of truth? Do they mean they finally realized that they actually have a spiritual self? Like awakening just out of this mainstream, we're here in a body, kind of, we work and then we die consciousness, right? Like what does it actually mean? And, these are all terms, and I don't feel like I have any desire to be the definer of terms, but just so that you all get what Brooke and I talk about and we can lay it out a little clearly. If I'm going to talk about like Balamo, awakening, donezo, I know I live in God. Like there's this final moment, right? There's this final frontier that in theory we all will cross this lifetime or the next, where we live in that sustained state. That's my belief. Just a belief. It's my belief, right? But up until then, I believe in a gradual awakening process, and we can have glimpses and we can have hella powerful realizations and we can have awakenings to truth, but we're still on this journey, right? For that to become a sustained state of being where the truth of reality and presence, like the hand, your hand in front of your face, like truer than true. So first, I just wanted to say that because a lot of people will use the term awakening when what they meant was realization, or what they meant was, holy moly, I'm a spirit, holy moly, right? Like I just broke free of religion. And now I know that there's more to the story. The second thing is, Locke Kelly, going back to what I said before, had a nice way of saying it in his first book, where he was like, hey, listen, we all have to heal. We were wounded in relationship, most of us, or we were wounded by life, but then developed beliefs about life. So relationship with life got wounded, and we have to heal that. If we don't heal that, then we're always going to have these difficulties that will show up interrelationally. That's the psychologist in him. So he would say, you're going to do it before you awaken or after. But either way, you got to do it. You're going to grow up and you're going to wake up. So you can grow up first and be a really psychologically mature human being, very integrated, very healed, very clear, very present, very loving. Let's not forget to talk about the heart, very loving. Or you're going to have these awakenings, like a blammo, it's going to happen out of the blue, or this gradual, beautiful awakening to truth. And you still got to grow up. You still have to develop a deepening and a spiritual maturity with life, right? With yourself, with others, and with the universe. Because we can see, I mean, our culture is so good for, like, when you and I make jokes about the law of attraction, it's not that I don't think something like that exists. It's that, like, spiritual grab bag, like, oh, the goodies, and, like, you know, the Amazon delivery, Amazon Prime of the universe. There's still a maturing of, what does this mean? Who am I really in truth? Who are they? I mean, you know, you and I are reading the Paul Selig books, the books of mastery. And it's like, you know, spiritual maturity is, well, lack of spiritual maturity is, I'm God, you're not. Right? That's not spiritual maturity. Maybe you had an awakening. You're God. You're oneness. You're everything.
Right.
But if that doesn't apply to other people,
right,
you didn't have a maturing of that realization. We can guarantee that, right? So it's going to happen before or it's going to happen after, but it has to happen. But rest assured, there are some people out there teaching and speaking that are teaching as if it's all happened and they didn't realize it didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have found that the teachers that I ultimately trust the most are the ones that are most in touch with their humanity, which I don't mean are the most neurotic ones, you know, like, because there is, you know, if the people who I'm thinking of, Judith Blackstone, John Prendergast, Matt Kahn, like there are certain people who, Locke Kelly, Adyashanti, who my opinion and my experience of them is that they're living in a very sustained, what we would call enlightenment state. And that they also are aware of this maturation process that goes on within the individual human being, and that is just a part of life. So it's not that they're more neurotic at all. In fact, I find them to be the opposite, but they're interested in their humanity, and they're interested,
like normal.
Yeah, they're interested in other people's humanity. There's nothing wrong. It's one of the interesting things. I feel like unhealthy teachers make not awake wrong, the bad ones, and awake the good ones. Whereas the people who I've found who are engaged with this maturation process, it's more of just this unconditional love, which, go figure, is like what it always comes back to, right? In the deep lineages. Unconditional love, people are just, it's perfect. They're having whatever experience, they're perfectly happening. And you're just in love with their humanity. You're in love with your own humanity. When someone you love dies, you grieve them and you feel honored to be here, to be able to love someone so much that you would experience grief, right? Like you run up against funny quirks of yourself where you're like, why did I get offended when so-and-so said whatever? Interesting, like so interesting. There's this curiosity and engagement and love and delight with their own humanity and with everyone else's humanity that I have come to take as a marker that, like, this person's really engaged in their life that's engaging with life from an awake perspective.
Yeah, a soul as a human.
Yeah, exactly. And that is the one place that I've found that I can find a trustworthiness in whenever I encounter a teacher who is telling the story of, like, oh, blammo happened, and then now I'm not a person, and then a lot of judgment-based statements. Well, you're not seeing, or you can't see. Or I remember sitting with a teacher once, and somebody asked about Donald Trump. Somebody was asking about politics, and he literally said the words to her, like, well, you can't see what I can see. I am climbing up through all of the dimensions of reality, and only I can. I was like, I am out of here.
I know. It's like, and that's how you understand the psychological maturity has an interference, right? Because there's a way that transmission can be delivered that doesn't imply one-upism.
Exactly.
So one can say, well, we were all here for a reason, and souls have plans, and Donald Trump is an agent of consciousness, right? If that's what he's believing,
right?
And it gives someone the perspective, like, we're all in this together. This is the mystery, and you might be able to experience this for yourself. That's very different. As soon as someone's got this, I am doing this, and you can't see it.
Yeah.
It carries a different frequency. And then that's someone who's still got some conditioning going around the world and life and being a human, and how being one up is a better position to be in. Yeah. They still believe that, right? Mm-hmm. There's something going on. Okay. So again, this is just a lot of language for an experience, but Adyashanti and La Kelly both talk about waking up, waking out, and waking in, that there's these different levels of awakening. We wake up at the level of the mind and transcendence. We wake out at the level of the heart with oneness and interdependence. And we wake in at the level of the body, which I don't even know how they fully describe that. But I swear, I think that's when you're like, yeah, blammo, I'm a spirit in a body and I want to be here, like, fully. That seems to be like the final frontier of integration in their ontological model. And that's just a model, right? But what's interesting is a lot of times you can see, depending on what has happened for that teacher, who they are, what they've been exposed to, what this quirky human body that they have is comprised of in terms of conditioning, they can have a really transcendent view. No heart. Mm-hmm. No openness, no interdependence, no oneness, right? And that's where you and I, have seen problems when we've spotted things we didn't enjoy in teachers. Was like, wow, there's something not open in their relationality, something unhealed for them that's still replicating. So I think it's interesting, just you and I will go towards people, if we can, that we feel have open hearts, because that's just a safer place to be. Okay, so that's really interesting. And I just want to say one thing before I forget. So I'm reading the Book of Truth. It's a channeled text that Paul Selig wrote. So I don't know if you got up to this, Brooke. But what I thought was interesting is, so from their perspective, from this perspective being presented in the book, we are spirit come to form to bring divinity into form for a reason. Okay? The evolution of consciousness. Buy that or don't. Non-dualists won't buy that. They're just like, why theorize about it? Cool. That's your thing, right? I like this stuff. So here's what I got that I thought was interesting. They were saying, even if you wake up, when you wake up, sooner or later it'll happen. But even if you wake up in this lifetime, you still have to go through your life lessons. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting perspective, right? Yeah. Again, mythology of awakening. So let's say you happen to like this view, right? You're like me, you're like, ooh, souls, reason, school, evolution. Okay. Well, in my imagination earlier in life, when we talk about mythology of awakening, I would have thought awakening, you're out of the game. Like, you're done. Like, you don't have to play that human game. There wouldn't be a life lesson. Like, the lesson is the awakening.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if any of this is true, but again, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Just try that on for size. Like, you can have an awakening, and then what that will mean is the life lessons will still come in, but now you'll meet them from an awake perspective.
Right. Yeah.
Right? You'll meet them from that vantage point.
Mm-hmm. So it's like life is giving you feedback, right? You're having certain experiences or certain things are showing up. And I was getting at this a little before with the teachers who I can really trust. It's like, do you notice the feedback? And are you curious about it? Like, do you continue to be reflective, or are you wearing the spiritual ego costume of, I don't need to be reflective because I'm awake? Because that's the dangerous point of view, right? We all need to be here and be reflective. And I do think, that I don't like the word lessons, because it's so Judeo-Christian shame-based, like we're here to learn lessons. Ugh, pass. Like it doesn't make me want to be here. We're here to have certain kinds of experiences that we signed up for. I like better. And then if we can meet them from an awake perspective, they get less janky, right? Like, for example, like I, of course, in my mind, always think back to, I had an abusive relationship with someone post-divorce. And what happened was I engaged in a relationship for a year. Me now, if I'd had that first date now, I would be like 15 minutes in and be like, pass, not for me. Because I'm able to like hear myself and engage with my body and trust myself and trust life. So in that case, the lesson would be, here's an opportunity for you to say, pass. I feel my no, not for me. So it does even out. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's just my beef about lessons. But I want to circle back to the heart. So I have found, because I have the gift of certain kinds of spiritual candy, big blammo, big realizations, and because I have a personality that tends to be wired towards judgment, I'm INFJ for those who like that particular personality typing. I don't know how much that means anything, but J for judging, discerning. I like that. I'm sure that a lot of that got set up based on early childhood stuff and survival system. I have a limbic brain that's always combing the room for who's safe, who's not safe, what's going on here, and then frequently in the past getting it wrong, of course, too. But there's a vigilance, we could say. So you introduce that into a being like me. You introduce these realization candy. I see with clarity. Oh my God, I actually experience that I am not the ideas that I had about what I am. It would be very easy, and it was for me for a little bit, to pull that through the thread of judging, right? Like, well, who's seeing with clarity and who's not seeing with clarity? I'm seeing with clarity. Or like, what are the things that are not true in this scenario? Or what are the, and this is a classic one, the stories. What are the stories that people are telling themselves? And I feel really, really grateful to have met, in particular, John Prendergast, who I think is the embodiment of living from the heart. So for those of you who feel like that would be a yum nutrient to be in the presence of, I highly recommend John Prendergast. And that was interesting to me. Like, I didn't matter how much clarity I had, I was still in a hell realm. And I couldn't resolve the hell realm, by which I mean chronic feelings of terror and dissociation. And then I got to be with John and I came into the heart. And for me, that realization was like, oh my God, if I can land in the heart, I can start to trust life. I don't have to be out there judging and poking and prodding, right, about what's out there. I can sit in the seat of the heart. I can trust life. I can feel safe enough to be here. And when I'm safe enough to be here, I realize there's a lot, like bajillions of good, nourishing things to receive in any given moment. Now that is a nice embodiment to have, and is a very different thing than I see who doesn't see. And so one thing I said about teachers that I trust is it's the teachers who are still interested in their and everyone else's humanity. I would say also the ones that can be in the heart, that they will deliver any teaching from the most compassionate point of view, because they know that ultimately, if we all want to be here embodying consciousness at a different place, that's the only way we're going to get there. That's the only useful thing, is to love people so they feel safe enough to have a different kind of experience of reality.
Yeah, a different remembering, perhaps. Yeah, it's inclusivity is one word that was coming to me. As you were speaking, there's this inclusivity that a teacher provides where it's really, they mean like we're really all in this together. We really are. You're no different than me. How could we not be in this together? And that's a really beautiful thing. There was something else that was coming to me for mythology that I was about to go off on. And then I got so entranced when you were speaking about the word inclusivity that I may have lost it. Let me think for 1 second. Mythologies. Okay.
No.
irrelevant and gone, probably.
or it'll pop back in at the very end here. We'll see.
Yeah, I'll be like, wait, another 10 minutes as I talk about this. But I do think, by and large, the most interesting thing when we start to look at this mythology, I got it, is, okay, here we go. We had someone write to us, and we were talking on the Patreon board and about normal relational stuff. Okay. I remember a while back when we were sitting with Judith Blackstone, she mentioned something about her relationship. At some point, her and her husband had a difficulty and they were getting help on it or something. And it's like, what? I was like, what? Whoa. Wait, what do you mean? What? But you're awake. And I think he is too. Like, what? You had, and it was like, of course, right? You're still a human and you're having relational issues. Well, we can get ideas like what this person was writing about, where it's like, oh, but I don't want to be the non-spiritual person who has these like annoying needs, or who's angry, or who's, judging, or who's everything. And that reminds me of this mythology that just because you're awake, you're not normal. Human wants, needs, desires, tensions can arise, right? These different things, requests, that these aren't all going to happen. And what just can happen as we're in this developmental maturational process is we can go from when we're solidly ego identified, okay, like we haven't even begun a gradualism of awakening. We're all about self-help. I'm broken, fix me. I'm broken and I'm going to fix me and I'm going to make me a very shiny, good version of myself. Yeah. And then we start to have these gradual realizations or awakenings where we find spirituality and we're drawn to it. And then we take on the spiritual superego. I'm going to be the good one, the spiritual one, the shiny one, the brilliant one, the energetic one, the
slow blinking one.
The nothing doing nothing one. I'm going to be the one who doesn't have feelings, who doesn't care, who doesn't associate with non-awake people.
Yeah.
Who has to talk about their awakening at all times. I'm going to be that one, right? Whatever it is. And this is innocent. This is part of the maturational process. It almost seems like you're not going to probably get out of this one. You may, but like it's so common that, you'll probably go from the self-help journey to, holy crap, I'm more than I think. I'm not a project to fix. I'm love. And wow, realization, to spiritual superego land, whatever that version is for you. I'm going to be the good one. I'm not going to have needs. I'm going to be perfect. I'm not going to have feelings. I'm not going to be messy. I'm going to judge. I'm only going to hang out with conscious people, whatever it is. You're going to take your little eddy swimming around in a circle. And then you're going to keep, if you stay present, if you stay open, if you stay compassionate, if you stay curious and inquisitive, you're going to keep deepening and you're going to say, wait. I think I got caught in a spiritual superego eddy that's based on a mythology or a conditioning, something I saw before, something I thought spiritual people did. My teacher did this. Brooke and Vanessa did this. Like someone did this. And I think I've taken this idea and said, this is what it's like. And now I'm superimposing it onto direct experience. And we're probably all going to go through that. You know, we have our moments of it, right? Gentle, cute, laugh, innocent, but keep inquiring, stay with it, right? That's one thing I was thinking about how Buddha's translated anyway is, he wakes up and he's teaching on this direct experience, but he says like, don't trust me, inquire, right? That was always his pointer. Don't trust me, inquire. And that's such a beautiful pointer because it allows you to be in relationship with yourself, these thoughts that you have, and with a teacher or others from the standpoint of openness. Like I'm learning, I'm listening, I'm attuning, I'm receiving, but also if I can't access it in my direct experience, like keep inquiring, keep trying it on for size, keep seeing like, does this feel true? Is this real? Is this intimate for me? Because I think that pointer alone, like don't just trust me, find for yourself, is a great way to start to break through at least what we started the conversation with which is like, all of the different trappings we can get caught on when it comes to the awakening mythology that can cause us to forego a direct experience of our own truth in favor of something that is an idea or someone out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what starts to remove the pedestals. And the great news about that is we are the one, right? We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the ones who get to go on this path. And because we are not separate selves, even though we're in a culture that believes that pretty strongly, great. Like we get to listen to shows like this and sit with different teachers and get support and get the nourishment that we can get from someone else's point of view. But ultimately, it's an inside job. And that is a way that we can have a genuine process of waking up and also know sooner than later when it's time to tap out on somebody who is just unaware, usually unaware that they're behaving out of integrity or that they have some blind spots that are just not being addressed. So,
yeah, gosh. I mean, I think just to end on this really sunny note, and we don't have to end like you get to respond, but I'm laughing because like we're wrapping it up and I'm about to bring in something totally unsunny. But, we were talking about how we can even get caught in these eddies of spiritual superego, right? Like not even see the ways that we're engaging that are artifice, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I imagine that's what's happening with some of these teachers. Like they must be believing themselves.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like they must be on some level believing. Now they could be sociopaths. Like there could be a lot of things, but for just the There's majority of people,
I think they're in the minority. Yeah.
Yeah. The majority of people who are acting in some way, shape, or form out of some level of integrity, whether it's they're judging their students, they're pedestalizing themselves, they're, creating shame in the classroom, like whatever mm-hmm. that is, they believe it. That's what happened. They just stopped. They sat on their laurels and they said, this is it, right? It ends here. I'm awake. I see. And they fell for it. They fell for their own ideology.
Right. That they had crossed a finish line and they did have the keys to the kingdom and everyone else did not have the keys to the kingdom. Yeah. And that's the troubling place to land. So there is no finish line, folks. It gets to keep deepening and deepening. And awake spiritual teachers have blind spots too, because we're never not human as long as we're in human bodies.
We're going to wake up, we're going to grow up, we're going to mature. And that's the beautiful thing. But I guess we get to look for that within ourselves and we get to look for that within others.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for being a part of our community and for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. That is also where you can subscribe to get our weekly digest of what we're up to and other resources that we're currently finding helpful. If you're wanting more support, blissandgrit.com also has more information on our private coaching practices. We're so grateful for the reviews you've written, for the membership support that so many of you have provided at Patreon, and for all the notes that you send. Thank you. We'll be back next week.